Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I'm JC Owens, and this is Rockmyworld, episode 20, The Crossroads and the Rosy Cross. Now, most of you will be familiar with Robert Johnson and the legend of the Crossroads, right? Like this idea that a musician goes down to the crossroads, hands his guitar over to the devil, and the devil tunes it for him, right? But those of you familiar with music theory would probably be familiar with the mandala flower that you see on the left-hand side of my thumbnail there. Well, you'll notice that it has a great similarity to the um, mandala flower on the opposite opposing side, which is from a Rosicrucian, book on alchemy, right? Now, Robert Johnson, his family and those like around him would have had a particular, would have came from a particular tribe, that practiced a very particular mystery school system. It's very similar to that which is practiced by, native tribes here in America, native tribes. It's practiced by, tribes in South America. It's practiced by people all over the world, as we've talked about before. And, I'm here to posit that, like, what Robert Johnson was talking about was a thinly veiled reference to this very mystery school stuff. Like, all the greatest artists throughout history, all the ones that, the names of from, Sir Francis Bacon, Shakespeare, and, Paganini, and, going on. All of these people, I would argue, were practicing the same system. You can see it in the symbols that they use, in the lyrics that they use, and the way that they play their music. Right? This is an overarching ancient system that covers basically, all areas of the arts and beyond. Okay? Like, when you talk about the cross, what is the cross? Well, the cross is a representation of the coming together of the spiritual and the physical. The liminal space between the two. You got fire and air, you got earth and water, you have the spiritual plane, you have the physical plane, right? Like, that's what the cross represents. And in the crossroads, it's that place of crossing between the two realms, right? And the rose is the flower, right? It's been called the eightfold path. It's been called lots of things by lots of different people throughout history. But it can be applied to, fencing with a sword. It can be applied to, martial arts, like as far as hand to hand. It can be applied to music. It can be applied to almost anything you can imagine. This system is designed to be a whole life system, right? Like, it's all interconnected. This is the stuff that Pythagoras was, playing with back in his day. This is the basis of all Western musical, history, as far as, since the Enlightenment and, the Renaissance, all that kind of stuff happened. This has been, the path we've been on, right? This is why so many of the greats are all practicing the same system. It's because it was designed that way when America was built. America was built by Freemasons and Rosicrucians, people who understood this stuff. Our scientific systems, were all built by alchemists, right? Like, Isaac Newton wrote more alchemical texts than he did anything on gravity or anything like that. These people were deeply engrossed in this kind of stuff, right? And anybody familiar with music theory will, start to see a lot of, a lot of these interconnecting tissues between music theory and the Rosicrucian system. When you start looking into it, our entire nation is built on this idea, or this bundle of ideas, I should say, Same with the UK, same with the whole Western world. And if you go to the Far East, you'll see much of the same thing, right? Like, how do you think the world's elites all get on the same page, going towards the same, end goals, which is, AI surveillance and this one world system, right? Well, it's because they're all studying the same stuff. They're all studying this unified system that all other systems were derived from. You see, it was lost long ago, but that's kind of what the Enlightenment and the Renaissance were. They took all of these ancient ideas from all over the world, and they spent the 19th and 20th century piecing them all back together into a new coherent system, a one world system. This is why you'll see groups like Freemasonry will say, like, oh, you can be any religion you want as long as you just believe in, one God, right? Well, the idea is that, like, you're the one God, right? Like, it's apotheosis. It's becoming your own God, man becoming God through his, technological wonders and things. They've taken this stuff and they've taken it to the next level. That's why, like, they started the Enlightenment in the first place. That's why America was founded in the first place. America is a melting pot, an alchemical melting pot, right? An alchemical melting pot where something, very specific is supposed to come out of it, right? You throw in all of the ingredients, you turn up the heat, and, like, you go through the steps just like any other recipe, and you get something at the other end. That thing at the other end is this one world system we are seeing come together now. You're just now being able to see the pieces start to line up. And, Robert Johnson and his Crossroads mess, like, is part of this story. It's part of the story of the 27 Club. He's the first member of the 27 Club that Kurt Cobain and Janis Joplin and, Jim Morrison, they all belong to, and I would argue they were all practicing the same system. They were all practicing the same system, and they ran afoul of the Brotherhood. They did something that got them in trouble, and they were, added to the list. Right? Like, as you can see, like, many people get added to the list these days and have things happen to them, right? People in pretty high positions just have, like, these wild accidents, helicopter crashes, and all these kind of things. Well, this is part of the oath you take, right? If you betray the Brotherhood, they will try to destroy you. I myself have encountered quite a bit of pushback because I talk about these things in the first place. You have to understand that in Robert Johnson's mind, in the mind of the people of that area of Mississippi at the time, blues really was the devil's music, and this kind of stuff really was considered, demonic in its origin. Even those who practice it, like, would call it Luciferian. Lucifer is their hero, their rebel hero. The one who stole fire, right, and brought it to mankind from their perspective, right? Like, to them, Lucifer and Prometheus are one and the same. It's 1 degree of separation, right? Like, that's the whole idea of this unified theory. It's to unify all of these world systems together into one system, right? It will be perfectly fine, like, for you to call yourself a Christian, but you won't be able to say that Jesus is the one true and only God. You won't be able to say that. You can be a Buddhist, but you won't be able to say, hey, Buddhism is the one true only path. You won't be allowed to say that. You'll only be allowed to, talk about it from this vague, relativistic, coexist style, like, ideology. And, it's all born of the Rosicrucian and Freemasonic systems, right? The mystery school, the ancient mystery school, whatever you would like to call it. It's why you see pyramids all across the world. It's why you find, the tiny mustache man symbols all over the world. The little swirly broken cross thing, or Hakenkreuz as they called it, right? The broken cross. This system, does work. The problem with magic is not that it doesn't work. The problem is it absolutely does, and people don't respect it for what it can actually do. All right, this is why I want to educate you all on what this stuff actually means. I want you to understand that Robert Johnson didn't go meet the devil in flesh at the Crossroads as much as he went and studied a system for a couple of years under a guy named Zimmerman. Zimmerman was quite familiar with the system, and he taught it to Johnson. And like I said, in their minds at the time, just like in the medieval times, they would have seen this system as a demonic system. That's why he said, "Oh, I learned it from the devil," right? It's not, real magic and real paranormal is, far less, bombastic and amazing than what Hollywood paints it. It's much more subtle. Much more subtle. It involves influencing your mind, influencing the way you think and feel about things. It involves hiding things and secrets. Secrets are the power source that runs all of it. That's what the occult means. Occult just means hidden. It just means hidden. And that's the whole secret behind the machine, right? It relies on you not seeing. It relies on you not looking and not understanding. Just like one could encode language, one can encode symbols. You can encode things into music, into movies, into theater, and with all of these works, you have two sides. You have the side that's meant for the public to understand, and the side that's meant for those in the know to understand. And I want you guys to be the ones in the know. I want you to join this club so that you can understand, so that we can more adequately fight back against it. As a Christian, I do not practice black magic or any of that kind of stuff, but I do think that it is important for us to understand how it works. You need to know how all of this stuff works if you're ever going to be able to get anywhere without having to become a slave to these people. That said, I hope you folks have a great rest of your day. I will talk at you later. Peace out.